Good morning and welcome everybody to the IGS Summit on Diversity and Entrepreneurship in California. This event was made possible with the generous support of the Wells Fargo Foundation and their small business growth sector. My name is Cristina Mora, and I'm Associate Professor of Sociology and the co-director of the Institute of Governmental Studies here at UC Berkeley. For those of you that might not know, IGS just celebrated a major milestone, its 100th year, providing cutting-edge research and policy analysis and serving as a preeminent center for discussion and debate about the most pressing issues facing the state and our nation. It is our honor here to help shepherd this Berkeley service and tradition into its next 100. So, when we thought of this event, it was amidst reports of the devastating toll that the pandemic would have on racial and gender inequality in the state. On the one hand, there's certainly the uneven health effects and impact of COVID to consider. But there are also the very worrisome ways that the pandemic is now impacting the economic livelihood of immigrant families, communities of color, and issues of inequality in California more broadly. We know that historically, entrepreneurship and especially small businesses have been important paths of mobility for many groups, and especially for Black, Latinx, and Asian communities. For these groups, mom and pop shops have been vital for uplifting entire communities and securing a more just economic future. At the same time, we know of the barriers that communities have faced, financially and otherwise, in making this economic goal a reality. So we hope that today's event can provide an opportunity to continue a critical conversation about diversity as communities and state leaders chart a new post-pandemic economic future, one that we hope centers diversity and creates the structures necessary for all communities to thrive in the years to come. So with that, I'd like to introduce our opening speaker, Jenny Flores, who will help kick off today's event. Jenny is the head of small business growth philanthropy for the Wells Fargo Foundation and a UC Berkeley Cal grad. She has more than 2 decades of experience in banking, impact philanthropy, and corporate citizenship, and is responsible for combining financial resources with expertise to help underserved and diverse entrepreneurs expand their efforts. She has an impressive record leading million and billion-dollar commitments for issues like diversity and investment in underserved communities, as well as in renewable energy. Prior to this work, she held roles in public advocacy for nonprofits and the California State Legislature. We are extremely honored to have her and all of you with us here today. I'll pass it on to Jenny now.
Great. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure on behalf of Wells Fargo to be here representing on a critical issue. I also think that it's just a treat for me to be present with the IGS because of my connection to this wonderful institution. I actually am a Cal grad, but also did my honors thesis in collaboration with the staff of the IGS. And I also happen to be a Cal and SAC intern. So it comes at no surprise that I have a lot of appreciation for the work of IGS, and I'm really pleased that they are focused on a few of my favorite topics: diversity, entrepreneurship, and an equitable economic recovery. And while the past year has been extremely difficult, I can't help but also be inspired by the moment. It's been remarkable to see the determination, creativity, and resilience of so many small businesses that have found innovative ways to navigate challenges in order to survive. They've had to make tough choices, from cutting costs, reducing staff, managing through closures, renegotiating contracts with clients, many of whom are in the same boat as they are. At the same time, businesses are pivoting to offer new products and services that are better suited to the demands of social distancing. And these businesses and thousands of others across the state of California that are owned by women and people of color could not have survived without all of us working lock in step to provide critical financial relief and more options for affordable credit, which I believe makes the difference between a small business survival and a small business closure. I'm also inspired by the massive resources that have been redirected to small business. The Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, has been a critical avenue for small business. And I'm excited that my colleague Steve Trautner, head of small business banking at Wells Fargo, will be part of the panel in a few minutes to discuss what we've learned through that initiative. And as an aside, I know Steve won't say this, but he took the helm of the small business banking team just one day before the first wave of PPP was passed by Congress. So I know you can't imagine that transition for him, but I can think of no better leader who could have stepped into that role. He's truly a powerful and effective advocate for small business, and I'm honored to work with him. Now, in terms of PPP, while it has provided immense support to small businesses, it's only one avenue, and we know entrepreneurs can't rely on a single source of support. That is why Wells Fargo has been focused on opening up multiple avenues to capital and technical assistance. For example, in the last month, Wells Fargo announced 6 equity investments in Black-owned banks, and one of them in Los Angeles, to generate a more inclusive recovery across the country. These investments will enable minority depository institutions to expand lending and deposit-taking capacity in their communities. In addition, last summer, we committed to donating all the gross processing fees from the first round of PPP back to the small business community. We are one of the only major banks to donate all the fees without subtracting any costs or expenses. This helped us to create a roughly $420 million small business recovery effort, the Wells Fargo Open for Business Fund. And that really targets small business owners of color, women, and others who were really hard hit by COVID-19. So overall, the Open for Business Fund to date has helped 16,000 BIPOC-owned small businesses keep roughly 50,000 local jobs. Equally important, the Open for Business Fund is likely to unlock $1 billion in financing for businesses nationally and facilitate at minimum 7.5 million hours of technical assistance. And here in California, we accelerated 10 million from the Open for Business Fund to support the California Rebuilding Fund, as well as many CDFIs across the state. But we are not done yet. Today, I'm excited to share that we're more than doubling our investment in the state of California to a total of 22 million. We have an additional 12 million coming to the state through CDFIs who can work with small business owners to stay open and adapt their business models and even help launch new businesses. As the old saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention and innovation. And my hope is that we can continue to harness this intense focus on small business to drive long-lasting and positive impact for diverse entrepreneurs across the state and nation. I want to thank all of you for being present to learn about the strategies that are working for our small business community. I look forward to working together with all of you to support an inclusive, sustainable small business recovery and to building back the sector stronger than ever before. Thank you so much and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Jenny. I too want to join Cristina in thanking you and your team at Wells Fargo Small Business Growth Philanthropy for your partnership and your sponsorship, without which this event and our new initiative would not be possible. We are really excited to launch with this summit our diversity and entrepreneurship initiative and to build a diverse cohort of future civic and political leaders who understand the challenges and opportunities facing women in POC-owned small businesses and who are committed to promoting entrepreneurship in diverse communities through public policy, advocacy, and other forms of creative engagement. I also want to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us today for our summit on diversity and entrepreneurship in California, Pathways to Recovery and Growth. My name is Christine Trost, and I am Executive Director of the Institute of Governmental Studies and one of the organizers of today's event. Before we begin, I would like to briefly describe what we have planned for the day. Our keynote panel will focus on the impacts of the pandemic and recovery efforts on women and POC-owned small businesses and diverse entrepreneurs in California. At the conclusion of the panel, we will take a brief 15-minute intermission and then return at 12:30 for our second and final panel, which takes a broader look at the structural barriers to diverse entrepreneurship in California, as well as highlighting success stories and strategies for creating an equitable and robust ecosystem that supports new and growing women and POC-owned micro and small businesses. Each panel will begin with opening remarks by the speakers, followed by a moderated discussion. We have reserved time for questions from the audience, so please consider submitting a question using the Q&A function on your screen, and we will also post other announcements to you in the chat. It is now my pleasure to introduce the speakers and moderator of our keynote panel, COVID and Economic Recovery Efforts in California, Impacts on Diverse Entrepreneurs and Small Business Owners. Their full bios may be found on the summit event page of the IGS website. State Senator Ana M. Caballero has a 30-year legacy of public service in her community, which includes providing legal services to farm workers in Salinas, serving 7 years on the Salinas City Council and becoming the first female mayor of Salinas in 1998. In 2006, she was elected to the State Assembly, where she continued to focus on the needs of local residents, including improvements in farm worker housing, clean drinking water, resources for gang intervention, education, and aid to undocumented students applying for citizenship. From 2010 to 2016, she served in Governor Brown's cabinet as Secretary of the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, during which time she was the highest ranking Latina in state government. In 2018, she was elected to represent the 12th Senate District, which includes the Salinas Valley, San Benito County, Merced County, and portions of Stanislaus, Madera, and Fresno counties. And she has been a leader in recovery efforts for small business owners across the state. Luis Granados has served as the executive director for the Mission Economic Development Agency since 1999, becoming chief executive officer in 2018. Rooted in San Francisco's Mission District, MIDA is advancing a national equity movement by building Latino prosperity, community ownership, and civic power. During his tenure, he has worked to create asset development opportunities for San Francisco Bay Area low to moderate income Latino families. Tara Lynn Gray is Chief Executive Officer of Fresno Metro Black Chamber of Commerce and Chamber Foundation, a 20-year-old community-based organization actively working to help Black-owned businesses in the Central Valley overcome systemic barriers to building generational wealth and advancing the interests of the greater African-American community through the creation of opportunities, advocacy, and business and economic development. Our fourth speaker, Steve Trautner, is the head of small business banking for Wells Fargo and is responsible for leading and accelerating the growth and focus on the company's small business clients, which have up to $5 million in revenue. Most recently, he served as EVP and regional bank executive, leading the Western region of branch banking at Wells Fargo. In this role, he was responsible for 2,400 Wells Fargo bank branches in 21 states, serving more than 12 million consumers and small business households. Our moderator is Sarah Razavi, CEO of Working Solutions, a nonprofit community development financial institution providing capital and consulting to startup and early stage small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area. She has 20 years experience in the social sector with expertise in operations, strategy, small businesses, and partnership management. Her work has specifically focused on under-resourced communities, including women, immigrant, and low-income communities. So welcome to all of our speakers, and thank you, Sarah, for serving as moderator of our keynote panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, Christine, and to the organizers of this event. I'm really honored to be here today. So yes, I lead Working Solutions CDFI. We're focused on small business lending, microloans, and micro grants to be exact. I started here at Working Solutions after business school about 7.5 years ago. And I did then what I try to do as often as possible. I approached opportunities, a reframe of problems, with a lens of who are we trying to serve and what are we trying to solve for? Because I've learned we can't be everything to everybody, certainly not right away and not all the time. So when we at Working Solutions looked at the 9 Bay Area counties that we serve, we thought, man, we are lucky. We're in a state, California, that has over 100 of the 1,100 community development financial institutions, or CDFIs. But we're also in the Bay Area, which has one of the highest concentrations of CDFIs in California. That meant we were lucky enough that we didn't have to be everything to everybody. We could find the need gap and fill it. And the gap we saw was capital for startup and early stage businesses who have systematically been left out of the financial mainstream, namely low-income entrepreneurs, women, and entrepreneurs of color. In serving these populations, we also knew that if you, your family, your race, your gender, or your community have been underserved for years or even generations, then that makes it harder for you to access capital now. Because, for example, generational lower levels of home ownership means less assets to leverage, means less access to funds, or lower levels of formalized credit and a dependency on cash rather than credit means, again, a less credit history to draw on. So again, less access to funds, because those are the means that lenders look to present you with capital. And so we at Working Solutions, again, under the stewardship of a strong Black identified director of lending and consulting, my colleague, Titi Aikile, are also exploring how a history of hearing no, not you, not now, or just declines in general, can train you not to ask and not trust institutions. Something we saw very clearly play out even once PPP was improved. Folks didn't want to take a low interest or forgivable loan. They wanted a sure thing, like a grant. So it's very important to me, and I believe it should be for all of us, to target our thinking and therefore assistance and solutions. It was only after we at Working Solutions focused who we were primarily serving that we were able to grow our lending from a boutique micro lender to 30% year-over-year growth, especially over the last 5 years, and especially this past year in COVID. Today's panel is intended to examine the impacts of COVID on women and people of color-owned businesses in California and the efficacy of recovery efforts underway. But that's still a large group, women, people of color. So I'm eager to hear how each of our panelists has thought about their specific target market and further focus their efforts. To set the stage though, here is some context about the breadth of who we're talking about and what some of their experiences may be. Size-wise, there are close to 4 million small businesses in California. This is SBA data. That's about 99% of all California businesses identify as small business. And I'm saying that for you to get a sense of how broad the definition of small business can be. 1.6 million of those 4 million small businesses are identified as minority owned. And overall, this group of small businesses, 4 million, employs 7 million Californians, or 50% of California employees. So a little bit more about how this group has endured COVID. We know the hardest hit under COVID are the smallest, less formalized businesses. Very small businesses are also, we know, more likely to be owned by women and communities of color, especially Latinx-owned, Asian, and Black entrepreneurs. The industries most impacted in California by COVID were food and food services, and they're the lion's share of the employer as well, education services, arts and entertainment, apparel, which includes manufacture and retail, and personal services. We also know within the industries hit hardest by COVID, small businesses with less than 50 employees have the even higher rates of Asian, Latinx, and women ownership. In particular, 1/3 in the heavily affected sector of restaurants and retail are Asian owned, just to give you an example. And here's a bit of what we've seen these businesses experience from a lender's perspective. We saw many small businesses, and Jenny mentioned this as well, reduce their operations or pivot so much so that they are now almost unrecognizable. That's very cool, but it's also incredibly hard to underwrite for because you don't know what was the past when you're thinking about the future, because there's not the same to compare to. And many businesses are not operating, but holding on. And without sustainable revenue, we've been waiting as a lender, and I know many lenders as well, for the tsunami of closures. But what's interesting is repayment has actually been strong. Most of that, we believe, is through cash programs like grants or unemployment benefits. And in fact, a recent report by the Urban Institute outlines how the economic crisis has impacted small businesses, and they recognize that while the data is still emerging, evidence is showing that the pandemic has not yet translated to higher delinquencies or defaults. So there you have it about this consideration about being highest risk, right? So where's the opportunity? First, when there's an end, and again, Jenny touched on this, there's always a beginning also. We will see, and I don't know about you, but I certainly have in my hometown of Oakland, as well as in our home base of San Francisco, I have started to see small businesses emerging, opening. I saw lots of closed doors. I saw lots of boarded buildings, but the boarded buildings are starting to say, find us online. And the opening buildings are new restaurants, many of which are different ethnic groups represented. Where there used to be a coffee shop, there now is a taqueria. Where there used to be a bar, there now is a chai bar. So again, while many lenders and specifically CDFIs have stepped into this opportunity, there is still underrepresented parts of the communities that still need support, particularly rural, deep urban, and communities of color. What we've seen over the last year, and I suspect we'll continue to see, is an imperfect process. But I hope today and the many good conversations that have and continue to be had push for change that is longer lasting. We're here today, especially this panel, to generate thinking and questions. So let's get started. To my dear panelists, each of you represents a different part of this landscape. And ahead of this conversation, we'd asked you to think about who exactly you represent. And each of you, state legislator, policymaker, CDFI, community organizer, a leader, a lender of scale, and all advocates, each of you is working in your own way to support the recovery effort. So as a starting point for the discussion, we'd ask you to prepare and tell us first about the organization or group you represent, and then how you define small business and the groups that your work is intended to serve. Really, we want to understand the problems you're trying to start. So let's start with Tara Lynn. And Tara, if you could unmute, there you go. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Sarah. Also, Christine, UC Berkeley IGS, and Wells Fargo for putting this very important discussion together today. I am Tara Lynn Gray, Chief Executive Officer of the Fresno Metro Black Chamber of Commerce and Chamber Foundation, where we engage, educate, and empower the Central Valley's Black businesses. It is definitely an honor to share a few opening remarks about the work that we do and our priorities. The Chamber is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, and as such, it has been the primary champion for Black and African diaspora-owned businesses and entrepreneurs in the greater Fresno region. In 2010, the Chamber established the foundation to operate programs benefiting low to moderate income individuals, in addition to charitable and educational work. for disadvantaged women, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Our BHOG, our vision is an equitable, open, thriving market without social, political, or economic barriers to the financial success of Black people. It has been and will continue to be a part of our strategic plan to create new economic opportunities and pathways to prosperity for low wealth entrepreneurs. We operate several programs. A few specifics include our supplier development and procurement technical assistance program called D3, which is focused on construction contractors. We have a Fresno recently incarcerated entrepreneurship network and discovery strategies program, which we call Friends, because that's more than a mouthful. And it is entrepreneurship training for systems impacted individuals. We have our Prosper Women's Economic Impact Center for women of color. And then we have a suite of programs in our green team, climate change programs, which include our Transformative Climate Communities grant, where we are establishing a car share, ride share, and electric bike network, our Youth Ambassadors Green Jobs Training Program, and green business certifications. And then lastly, our newest program, which is our Drive Betting Big on small businesses owned by women and people of color. Drive is a 10-year, $4.2 billion regional investment plan. And my foundation is leading the Betting Big work group, which is squarely focused on eliminating the disparities that exist in the marketplace for women and BIPOC by helping 150 small businesses and creating up to 6,000 local jobs. We aim with this initiative to close the credit gap, the wealth gap, and the trust gap for Black entrepreneurs. And we feel this is particularly important because of, one, its approach and the impacts of COVID-19, which you mentioned earlier on small businesses. Black entrepreneurs gain wealth faster than their non-entrepreneur counterparts. And if we put the wealth of Black people in perspective, 100% of all Black Americans combined have 50% of the wealth of the richest 400 people in the world. So that's a lot of wealth in the hands of a very few. Black families have $166,000 less wealth than white families. This is a greater disparity than the disparity that existed pre-civil rights era. And lastly, Black college grads have $25,000 more in student debt than their white counterparts. So in short, the American dream is lost on Black people. And the inequities that existed pre-COVID were exacerbated by COVID, with the closure of more than 40% of the nation's Black businesses. So I posit that serious, targeted, regional, and financial supports are needed to help create a California economy where we all thrive together. My dad used to say that when things get better for the guy at the bottom, they get better for us all. And I think my dad was right when I was growing up, and he's right now. If we focus on closing the equity gaps, we all win. And there are just too many equity gaps to list them all here now. But I've spoken about the ones that are most significant.
Thank you. Thank you, Tara. Thank you so much. Senator, I would pose the same question to you. You've put a lot of great legislation forward. I hope you tell us a little bit. There's lots more coming, I know, and I trust. But if you could define who you've been trying to serve and the work you've been focused on.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today and participate in a panel that really is critically important as we look at how do we recover from this worldwide pandemic. I'm happy to be included. What I want to do is tell you a little bit about my district, which is a rural agricultural district. It encompasses the counties of San Benito, Merced, and then the Salinas Valley, and then parts of Stanislaus, Madera, and Fresno. It's the very rural parts of California. And what we know is that this COVID pandemic has really exacerbated, I want to agree with Ms. Gray, has exacerbated all the inequities that existed prior to the pandemic, got really magnified. Our region is agricultural, and it feeds the country, quite frankly. All of the workers were determined to be essential. So they had to show up to work even if they were afraid to get sick. Low wage workers living in a high wage or high cost of living state. Many who share housing accommodations and live in overcrowded housing situations with a lack of healthcare benefits and the lack of vacation and sick leave benefits. So many of the workers showed up to work even if they weren't feeling well, which meant they endangered their coworkers and then brought their illnesses home. And the reason I tell you all of this is because in many ways, our workforce is a critical part of the infrastructure that and the world of small businesses. In rural communities, these workers are going to go into the mom and pop stores and the mom and pop restaurants and get their services. And so the ravage of the virus really hit, not only did it hit economically the community, but it also spread the disease throughout the entire community, and everybody was impacted by it. And so some of the solutions had to be solutions that allow people to stay home when they're sick and to be able to isolate, which is very difficult to do in many of our communities. So we saw the highest death and illness rate in the farm worker community. Historically, underserved farm workers were the last to get the necessary PPE to do their work, and the testing and the vaccine. So I've been inundated with these issues. But just alongside of that, what we saw is that the stay-at-home order really impacted the small business community the worst. While the Costco's and the Walmarts were allowed to stay open, inexplicably, the mom and pop entities were forced to close. They were not given the option. And so what happened is that you saw people traveling a long distance to go to the entities that were open. And it was very frustrating for small businesses to see their customers going somewhere else to get what they could have provided had they been given an option. And especially in rural isolated communities, small businesses they're dependent on small businesses, and many of the small businesses are immigrant entrepreneurs who came to the country and worked minimum wage jobs, and then decided they needed to control their future and started their own small business, only to find during this pandemic that they were forced to shut down. So one of my biggest priorities has been looking at how do we define small businesses? What are the kinds of resources that they need? And how can the state be a partner in helping to get them back on their feet again? In the last year's budget, we were able to get some money in a tax credit, but we were afraid of the impact that this pandemic was going to have on the state budget. So we couldn't make a big commitment. In the meantime, a number of us continued to work on the issue. And when the report came out in December that the state was seeing billions of dollars in additional revenue, unanticipated revenue, because the stock market had been so good, we made the commitment to prioritize putting $2.6 billion into small business grants. Ultimately, the governor put $500 million out of this year's budget, made that commitment, and we were able to negotiate and work an agreement where we put an additional $2.1 billion out. And they're grants, they're not loans. The total amount is $25,000, $5,000, $15,000 and $25,000. And we know it's not enough, but it's a down payment on what we think is a really important program. And we're now working on the micro businesses, because we know we missed many of them. And those are the taco trucks, the ice cream vendors, the people who sell fruit out of their trucks, the flowers on the corner, all of those people are really important. And so I'm looking forward to having conversations about how do we get them resources and yet not be subject to fraud in terms of identifying who it is that has had a business like that and who really needs the resources.
Sure. Well, thank you. And the state care and the state California small business COVID grants that you referenced, what a great boon to have allocated $500 million initially, and then for that to be re-upped thanks to the advocacy, as you noted, Senator, if you and your colleagues. Thank you for that, because it really was oversubscribed. We knew it was going to be more small businesses were going to need that help, and now more small businesses can get it. So thank you for your efforts and your focus specifically around the workforce, the agriculture and farm workers, and now micro businesses as well. Luis, turning to you, if you could, again, same question, give us a sense of what Meta does and your focus in the problem you're trying to solve.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this important conversation. My name is Luis Granados. I am the CEO of the Mission Economic Development Agency, or MEDA. We're located in San Francisco's Mission District. MEDA is a nonprofit that has been strengthening small business since 1973. Today, we are a comprehensive community development organization serving San Francisco's Latino community. Starting and nurturing small businesses is one of the key ways our community builds wealth and power. MEDA defines a small business as one with fewer than 100 employees. Typically, though, the businesses we serve are much smaller. They are street vendors, caterers, restaurants, childcare providers, beauty salons, construction contractors, and local retail shops. All of them are small neighborhood serving businesses. Many of our entrepreneurs are immigrants. Almost all are people of color. When these businesses start, they are often run solely by immediate family members. However, we know that access to capital from traditional lenders is one major challenge for these entrepreneurs. That is why in 2015, MEDA launched Fondo Adelante, the Bay Area's only explicitly Latino-focused CDFI. To date, we've dispersed 11 million in loans, 367 loans to small businesses, 60% of them Latinos, 75% to immigrants, 30% to IT holders, 60% to women. When the pandemic hit in March 2020, our small businesses were among the hardest hit. Restaurants were forced to lay off employees and shutter their doors. In-home daycare providers no longer had kids to watch. Hair and nail salons had to close, all through no fault of their own. Community members were also becoming ill in disproportionate numbers. With just 15 of San Francisco's population, Latinos have comprised 40 to 50% of all COVID-19 positive cases in the city. Our CDFI worked with the city of San Francisco to devise the San Francisco Hardship Emergency Loan Program. SF helped to offer 0% interest loans of up to $50,000 with no fees, no collateral, no personal guarantee, and no payments to begin until July 2021. Our CDFI initially dispersed $4 million through SF Help with a second round of funding after the first money ran dry. Later, the Latino Small Business Fund was also created, modeled after SF Help, and specifically targeted to meet the specific pandemic-related needs of Latino small business owners. Our CDFI also partnered with two other CDFIs, Self-Help Federal Credit Union and Opportunity Fund, to package PPP loans for our Latino small businesses. We've successfully packaged over 100 PPP loans totaling $6.3 million. MEDA's CDFI has deployed more than 13 million in total to our small business community in response to the pandemic. Despite the successes, more immediate assistance is needed. It should be noted that for every one small business loan we were able to disperse, we received 10 loan inquiry forms. Finally, we must all look to define and implement policies that break down systemic inequities that have laid bare by this crisis. We must strengthen that ecosystem of communities of color with capacity building for organizations that know these communities best. Also, it is imperative that we equitably allocate capital to small businesses serving these communities. No historically marginalized community should ever again face the disproportionate effects of a crisis. We believe that the Biden administration American Rescue Plan is a good start, and we applaud it. But we must do much more. Our small businesses need grants, not just loans. They need commercial rent forgiveness. And our government must finally include businesses owned by undocumented immigrants in its relief and recovery programs. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Luis. And yeah, you touched on the collaboration of CDFIs. Really proud to be a member of the CDFI community. Again, the senator's more recent bill to allocate and focus and partner specifically with CDFIs throughout the state to reach the hardest to reach populations. Thank you, Meda and Luis, for the work you've done. Steve, now to you, and if you could again address the problems you're trying to solve. And of course, you are our lender of scale on this panel, so we'd love to have some considerations about that as well.
Hey, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And Sarah, I'm actually glad to be in the last position here because it sets up my problem statement perfectly, which is what you heard from the other panelists is the ability they bring in their organizations to be incredibly nimble, very innovative, and very flexible. And my problem statement is how do I combine those capabilities with what I bring to the table, which is substantial scale and capital, and create a two-way flow? Because historically, the flow from the large financial institution to community organizations has been one way. We provide capital, and they serve constituencies across the country. What I want to create is an ecosystem that flows in two directions. There's the infusion of capital into community organizations. What I want back is the insights, ideas, and things that actually have the ability to be scaled so that I can bring those into the mainstream as part of how we serve businesses on an everyday basis. And so that's the overarching problem statement I have, with a particular emphasis on breaking down the historical barriers that have gotten in the way of effectively reaching diverse small business owners, which we all know has been a huge problem and has been exacerbated by what we've seen as we've gone through the pandemic itself. So with that as a starting point, in terms of the customers that we serve and how we define small businesses today, you heard in the introduction, we generally define them as businesses with up to $5 million in annual sales. What I'll quickly tell you is that 61% of our customers that we do serve, of the 3.3 million small businesses that are Wells Fargo customers today, are businesses with less than $100,000 in revenue. So we skew very heavily towards micro, small-sized businesses. Those businesses are located across all 50 states in the US, plus Puerto Rico, and in some of the islands like the British Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and other locations that are part of the broader United States. So we literally serve people in just about every community in the country itself. And so we have the diversity of those customer needs that we try to meet at scale, and be able to do that in a way that is both meets the regulatory and risk management needs that we have as a large regulated financial institution, and at the same time leveraging the power of things like digital capabilities, to be able to provide some degree of personalization. And we're trying to figure out constantly how do we make things more personalized to meet the unique needs that diverse audience of customers brings to the table every day. What we've been doing and focused on during the pandemic, as Jenny noted in her opening remarks, PPP has been a catalyst event in many ways. It has become a gigantic engine, one for directly serving and helping small businesses. So to date, since the program launched, we've helped over 250,000 small businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program, and cumulatively deployed nearly $13 billion in funding to those organizations. And what we've seen is that 43% of those loans were made to small businesses located in low to moderate income or majority minority census tracts, And if you pencil that math out, that says north of $5.5 billion has gone into those geographic communities. And while census tracts are not the most precise measurement, as most of you are probably aware, the precision data that we have on racial and ethnic diversity in our small business communities, unfortunately, is not as good as you have when you look at mortgage data. So that is a gap that we are working actively to address. But what we've at least seen in this most recent round of the PPP program has been there's voluntary disclosure of racial ethnic backgrounds of the business owners themselves. And for those that have disclosed, it does line up pretty tightly with that census tract information. We've seen as 41% of those that have disclosed their information to us are minority-owned businesses, and that ranges from 17% Hispanic, 13% Asian-owned, 9% Black African-American-owned, and 2% Native American or Pacific Islander. From a gender diversity standpoint, we see that 37% of those businesses are owned by women, and 14% are either directly owned by veterans or by the spouse of a military veteran. So it does, show us that we have some degree of reach, but the key gap that I have is PPP to me is like a shotgun blast, right? It's big, it reaches a ton of people, but what Tara identified, right, that need for precision, if you're going to solve a lot of these barrier issues, isn't there. So what I would say is that a lot of good done through PPP, but a lot more precision tools and capabilities that need to be developed as we come out of it. So Sarah, I liked the thing that's been called out a number of times here is, I think of what the work that's been done as we've gone through the pandemic using programs like PPP as just the beginning. And the question that we ask is, how do we then build off of some of the things that we've had to do going through the pandemic itself? And you'll see our Open for Business Fund that Jenny highlighted is the first of many things that we're saying is, let's take that basic capital, let's deploy it in a very different way than we've done historically. Let's generate more insights off of that. And then let's further reinforce that with capital and increase the speed of innovation of the tool set that we bring to the table to work with diverse small business owners.
Thank you so much, Steve. Tara, I'm going to turn to you to piggyback on what Steve was just saying about this opportunity. We had the expansive big try, whether it's PPP or other SBA initiatives. But what have you seen in your experience that's specifically, are things getting better or are they the same for the businesses you've been working for?
Well, I would say that we are seeing the triumphant spirit of Californians and our country as we all fight back from the devastating effects of the pandemic. I am seeing starts, they are up. But I want to kind of pivot a little bit and say that one of the things that we've recognized in our region is that the problem is not with our business starts. It's really with business sustainability and scale. And so we are seeing that businesses start, but because of low wealth status of the entrepreneurs that are starting, the financial resources are not there to really build and scale. And we know that it takes 25 years for a business to become a household name. And so if we're talking about generational success and lasting like that, we're talking about a long on-ramp for financial resources. And I also want to point out that it's extremely important. Senator Caballero mentioned the difference between those businesses that were allowed to stay open during the pandemic and the small businesses that weren't. The reason why that is so significant is because 48% of small business purchases are recirculated locally and are a boom to the local economy versus only 4% of that being recirculated by the large change. So it is a multiplier effect to the local economy. and when the large businesses are allowed to stay open and the small businesses are not. And so I think in general, we need to have laser focus on our small business and provide the supports, financial and otherwise. PPP was a start. Round one wasn't so great. We only had about 5% of our businesses receive funding. We saw that raised to 18% with the second round. We've seen better success now with the EIDL loans. And of course, the great equalizer is the California relief grant. And that is just $500 million. We thought was a big deal in the first round, but an additional $2 billion is, I want to sing, from the choir on that.
Yeah. Thanks, Tara. I'm going to take up this point about sustainability. Part of that, I think, might have to do with and generational thinking and how long things take with leadership. Because Luis, when we talked, you pointed out in preparation for this conversation, you mentioned the trends you saw as people of color were systematically left out, but also people of color-led organizations were not part of framing the solution. And if we're not at the table, then we can't possibly help rise up others. Can you talk what recovery efforts look like that adopt a racial equity frame and why that is so needed? Luis.
Yeah, thank you for asking the question. I think that, what we're seeing right now in communities of color throughout California, throughout the United States, is that often these communities of color have to rely on third parties to provide the services or the loans or the technical assistance because the capacity isn't quite there yet. I'll tell you, in California, there are only 3 Latino-led CDFIs that were able to process PPP loans, 3 in the entire state that are Latino-led. In the United States, there were only 7 Latino-led, Latino-adjacent CDFIs that could process PPP loans. The capacity is just not there. I think that if we keep on doing that, we're always going to be looking at third parties to support our communities. And so I would think the same thing is the same case for in African-American communities, in Asian communities. So I think focusing on capacity building and leadership and focus that it is those entities that understand those communities better, understand the culture, understand the language, understand how that community works. But the reality is that that capacity isn't quite there. It is because of that right now Meta is working with El Pájaro CDC in Watsonville to provide lending. We're partnering with them to provide loans through our CDFI and helping them to get CDFI status because they don't have a local serving CDFI in the state. I think the emphasis on capacity building is really key. Thank you for that, Sarah.
Yeah. I'm kind of going to mix in some of the audience questions that are already starting to come in as we continue through till about 12:10. Senator, you have worked on several relief initiatives. We've already talked about the California Grant Relief Program, and you now have a strong small business bill, SB 625, in play right now about working with CDFIs. Can you tell us and help us understand a little bit about how funds are allocated when you think about serving the state, whether they're federal dollars that are coming or they are state initiatives, so that people get a sense of, whether it's Merced or LA, how folks get the capital they need. This is an audience question about serving the various counties in the state.
That's a really good question. Let me just say that the federal government, one size doesn't fit all. And so the federal government has the same issue we have, which is they're trying to figure out if we distribute money, how do we distribute it to 50 states so that it's fair? One of the idiosyncrasies of this, the relief that was passed from the federal government is that I believe the cutoff was community cities of 50,000 and counties of over 500,000. They got their money directly from the federal government, check in the mail kind of thing. Those communities under 50,000 and counties under 500 receive their money through the state. And so then it's one more hurdle to go through. And this latest grant, I have my small cities asking me, okay, when are we going to get the money and where is it coming from? And so I'm trying to get that information because I just don't know what the federal legislation said. But what has happened because of that is that there's an inequitable distribution of resources. And I guess under the theory that if you're a bigger community, you have more of a need than if you're a smaller community. The challenge with that is I have 27 cities in my district, and 3 of them are over 50,000, which means that I've got 24 or so that are significantly under 50,000. And I want to emphasize what Ms. Gray said, which is that the money from these small businesses is recirculated within the community, and your tax dollars are not going somewhere else. And that got all redistributed during this pandemic. For a year, these smaller communities with very small budgets, $2 million, $750,000, are absolutely decimated. And the relief that's coming in is not going to be enough to bring them, to make them whole. So you do see these inequities. And I have to say that unfortunately, when we did the distribution, the formula that went out, on the last, not the one in December and not the one that just got passed, did a fairly inequitable redistribution of the money as well. So we exacerbated it at the state level as well. That will not happen again. And we've got markers on it. We need to make sure that our rural and the smaller communities get the resources that they need.
Thank you, Senator. And again, we're some imperfect process. I think recognizing that as advocates, as supporters, and as leaders is probably the first step in making implementing changes.
That's
so
right.
Thank you, Steve. Back to you. Again, we're hearing about some of the points, and I really want to piggyback on what Tara said around sustainability. Can you sustainable financing, not just startup capital? Can you speak to any ways that maybe as a cause of the pandemic, Wells Fargo is starting to think and act differently about sustainability, or even just about support to women and communities of color?
Sure thing, Sarah. To start with, if you look at the way we structured the Open for Business Fund, right, historically that would have been simply a provide capital to CDFIs, and that allows them to extend loans, to pay down existing principal on loans, to reduce rates that people are paying on loans, and that would have been the whole program. But we've actually created it to have 3 pillars, one of which is the provision of capital, but there's 2 additional pillars, and the thought process is that capital is necessary, but it's insufficient by itself. And those 2 pillars are focused on, number 1 is technical assistance. And it gets to that idea, and Tara said it so well, right? This idea of businesses look totally different than they did 6 months ago, a year ago, because they've had to transform themselves, right? You go from a full service, sit down or in-person everything to some version of a hybrid model. And so how do you help a small business owner who doesn't have the resources to go out and hire a consulting firm to come in and design a web strategy, show you how to set up accepting payments online, right? That's a huge hurdle for a lot of businesses. And so a big chunk of the capital that we're deploying through the fund is focused on that technical assistance to help businesses with the evolution that they need to make and the skills that come with it, because it may require a very different set of skills running the business than you did pre-pandemic. The third area is looking at resiliency. And so that's this idea of, right, the landscape has been transformed dramatically. Supply chains look different. There are different policy needs that need to be out there. And so it's focusing on how do we deploy dollars around creating better resiliency infrastructure that wraps around small businesses. And so that's just one example of how, right, we've taken what would have been a single track traditional approach and put it into a multi-track thing that's trying to address the multitude of avenues that have to be gotten at as you look at how we address the needs of small businesses today. Another area I'll highlight that we're focused on is that, right, historically we break small businesses down into subsegments, right? We'll take the smallest of the small micro businesses. We'll take that kind of big middle group that's somewhere in that $100,000 to $1 million in sales, and then we take the larger cluster there. We've always segmented the world that way. We never took the extra step beyond marketing to say, wait a minute, diverse small business owners are a subsegment in and of themselves, and they have very unique needs. And how do we make sure that we're designing the right value propositions, the right tools, the right access mechanisms for them there, the right outreach strategies around that? And so what we actually now have stood up is we have a diverse segments leader for the Consumer Small Business Bank at Wells Fargo. There's actually a leadership role that reports directly to our Chief Executive Officer. Their exclusive mandate is to focus on diverse segments with the intent of wire that into how we run the business every single day. And the analogy I've always used is we've got to stop making diverse small business owners at the end of the sentence. We got to put that right up at the front of the sentence, along with how we think about the market as a whole, small business as a whole. We design it in up front, and we infuse it throughout everything we do. Technical tools, products, value propositions, you name it.
I see Tara shaking her head. Yes, that's always a good sign. That's good. Thanks, Steve. That sounds like a lot of good progress in all the right direction. A question from the audience to the panel. Because this comes up about risk. So part of the risk is startup capital. Part of the risk is not being considered as part of the solutions. Another one is the sustainability of ongoing capital. Another one, and the senator touched on this, in a high cost environment like California, rent. And I'm curious, in your worlds, have you talked about, heard about any considerations around commercial rent forgiveness or support? In California, we did see several counties put moratoriums. We also saw several counties work with landlords for incentives and some grant programs. But what have you all heard, and is this an issue that you think is actually really important for small business owners? And that's a question to the panel. If anybody has an answer, please chime in.
Let me just say that I think it's a huge issue. We've talked about it a lot in our negotiations around what kind of benefits or what kind of solutions can we come up with. There's so many things going on. You kind of feel like overwhelmed, but it is definitely an issue. This isn't the only thing. One is commercial rent. The other is the governor, through an executive order, basically said that utilities could not discontinue service. And so you have water and electrical services. Many of the electrical services are municipal services. And so basically you pay as you go. And if you're not paying, someone else is going to have to pay for you, ultimately in increased rates. And so I'm told it's close to $1 billion that's owed on utilities as well. And not all of that is going to be residential. Some may be commercial as well. So how we deal with this is going to be really, really important. And the challenge is going to be, how do we take these resources that are coming from the federal government and figure out how to distribute them in a way that pays off some of this debt so that we can get back to a more normal environment.
Yeah, go ahead, Tara.
I was just going to say, I would agree that we do have to find a solution for commercial rents. I have a small business that we work with, and most of the small businesses that we work with are micro enterprises, and they are less than $1 million a year in revenue, less than 5 employees. And I have one that we are working with right now that is $50,000 in arrears for commercial rent on 2 places that she has, 2 small mini malls in her case. And though she can get PPP to take care of her employees, there is no solution yet that deals with that $50,000 that she's in arrears. But the other point I also want to make, 50% of all of our small businesses are home-based businesses. And so until we deal with housing stock in our state, we still have a crisis for small businesses when it comes to where they operate, because 50% of them are operating in a commercial location and the other 50% of them are operating at home. And price and availability is a problem in both markets.
Very fair point. And to my earlier opening remarks, we know the smallest businesses are also primarily owned by women. So there's a lot of correlation between, or an overlap between home-based and women-owned businesses, and not all exactly the same, but there definitely is a lot of overlap. We have just a few more minutes, and a question came up speaking about women, talking about partnerships with women centers. Luis, you talked a little bit about a women business center that you all are partnering with in Meta, but there are 16 women business centers funded by the Small Business Administration and the state of California. Is there any indication from you all from partnerships that you're aware of with designated organizations like the women's centers, or any communities that are targeting communities of color specifically as a partner to work with? Luis or Steve, I'll turn to you guys as we gave Senator and Tara an opportunity to answer the last one.
I defer to Steve. You want to answer that?
So Sarah, I can't speak to the women's centers that you cited there. What I can talk to is, a partnership that we've had for some time that we're actually doing work to amplify in a broader way has been with NAWBO, the National Association of Women Business Owners. It's been a long time partnership, but it's one that I personally feel like we've underutilized it. And so my team, for the last about 6 months, we've been working on a whole rethink of our women, a focused women business owner strategy. Again, given there's a unique set of needs that women business owners face, very strong overlap with the African American community, because the highest percentage of entrepreneurs in the African American community are women. And so we are redesigning our whole strategy there with a huge emphasis. Again, access to capital, very important, but what we see and hear in terms of feedback there is the much greater need is for education, knowledge, and networking / mentoring, and trying to create access points and programmatic things that we can actually leverage specifically for women business owners there. So that's one thing that we're actively doing here as part of the broader diverse segment strategy that we've got in flight.
Thank you.
Sarah, if I can just add to that, I'm really pleased to know that there are 16 women business centers. I'm wondering, again, going back to the capacity issue, do they have the capacity? It seems like that they have the capacity to provide the technical assistance that is most needed, which is great. And I'm wondering, do they have the capacity to also do the lending so that entrepreneurs are able to navigate the system easier? So that's the other question to me about what the 16 business centers, what do they have the capacity for? I think adding the lending capacity to them just makes more sense, because there's a lot to be leveraged there based on what they've done with their capacity to provide technical assistance.
Yeah, and I think I want to make sure to clarify your point, there is the one provider is providing one piece of the puzzle, and then what partnership capacity do they have for collaboration to bring on a lender, a community lender, a scale lender, and then in the future, other investors, again, to Tara's point about ongoing sustainable support. I've started to see, and I'm really happy to see so many small but VC firms that are targeting women and communities of color, because as we've discussed, debt is not the only financing tool. And in fact, term loans are not the only financing tool. We need lines of credit, we need other access. So there's grants at the front end, different financing tools, and then investment as well. And no one entity is going to have that in complete check for every single audience and every single target market. So to Luis's point, thinking about your capacity and what you can outsource and support and bring in a partner that you truly trust so that you can reach these communities. I knew this was going to go by fast, but that went even faster than expected. We are just about time for our break. I want to again take this opportunity to thank our panelists and the organizers for your consideration and your time today. And to those who are attending, many of you for your questions, but also for your considerations. You are the ones who are going to be posing and digging deeper and hopefully reaching out to not just the panelists and the organizers today, but to other community partners that you can work with to try to get to solve for that specific population, because it's in that specificity and target that we really are going to make the greatest impact. Christine or anyone from the group, if you'd like to chime in. Otherwise, we have just a few minutes. We're asking for about a 15-minute stretch break. We'll be coming back at about 12:30 for the second panel. And that second panel's focus is really going to be about some solutions, specifically in the micro-lending space. So we welcome those of you to take a break, answer the answers you need to, the questions you need to, take care of what you need to, and come back at about 12:30 for the balance of this discussion today in panel number 2. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's summit on diversity and entrepreneurship in California, pathways to recovery and growth. My name is Christine Trost, and I am Executive Director of the Institute of Governmental Studies at UC Berkeley and one of the summit organizers. It is my pleasure to introduce the speakers and moderator for our second and final panel of the day, Expanding Equitable Access to Affordable Capital for Micro and Small Businesses Owned by Women and People of Color in California. On-the-ground experiences, strategies, and successes. The speakers' full bios may be found on the summit event page of the IGS website. As with our first panel, we welcome your questions and we will try to fit in as many as possible, so please submit them using the Q&A function on your screen. We will post other announcements in the chat. Our first speaker is Xiomara Pena, who drives Small Business Majority's external engagement efforts toward a more inclusive and equitable economy that directly benefits entrepreneurs in underserved communities. She has extensive experience supporting small businesses, particularly those run by people of color, women, and immigrants. Prior to joining Small Business Majority, she piloted business retention programs for the city of Los Angeles and programs geared toward empowering at-risk youth. She also has extensive experience as a business owner, community organizer, and campaign manager. Yeri Olivares is Chief Operating Officer at the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation. Since 2011, she has managed the foundation's technical assistance program, microloan program, and downtown business hub incubator that serves small businesses throughout the Central Valley. She directly assists business owners in areas such as business plan development, cash flow projections, microloan application and loan packaging, marketing, and management. She coordinates and executes financial literacy workshops throughout the region, in addition to connecting small businesses to the tools and resources necessary to become self-sufficient. Robert Lattimore is Executive Vice President, Diverse Markets for Main Street Launch. His responsibilities include developing strategic partnerships and providing access to capital for African American entrepreneurs in the Bay Area. He has over 35 years of experience in the public, private, and economic development sectors, working with company founders, financial institutions, community-based organizations, and local municipalities. He has helped over 200 entrepreneurs in diverse business sectors and secured over $35 million in investment capital for early-stage businesses. Patty Chang is CEO and co-founder of Feed the Hunger Fund, a community development financed institution that provides critical loans to help farmers and food entrepreneurs, primarily women, immigrants, and people of color, start and grow businesses and build a more equitable food system. She has spent her entire career fighting for social justice. Some of her previous roles were president and CEO of the Women's Foundation of California, president of the San Francisco Commission on the Status of Women, and serving as a commissioner on the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom and on the San Francisco Commission on the Environment. Our moderator is Leticia Corona, who was appointed by Governor Newsom to serve as the first Central California Regional Lead Advisor at the California Office of Small Business Advocate, also known as Cal-OSBA, within the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. She leads strategy development for Cal-OSBA's ecosystem building work, access to capital, and innovation, and is creating a model that will be replicated across the state. Before joining Cal-OSBA, she was a Global Development and Population Fellow at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, where she created and managed a multi-million-dollar grant-making portfolio focused on young people of color-led advocacy and policy organizations in the United States. I want to offer a warm welcome to our speakers and thank you, Leticia, for serving as our moderator on this panel.
Thank you very much, Christine. Good afternoon. Thank you to First and foremost, thank you to the UC Berkeley Institute of Governmental Studies for this great opportunity to moderate the summit's second panel. As Christine said, I am the regional lead advisor at the California Office of Small Business Advocate, which I will refer to as CalOSBA moving forward. We are located within the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, GOBIS for short. CalOSBA is the principal advocate in the state, and we really are the voice of small businesses and micro and diverse. In alignment with Governor Newsom's focus on building a California for all that's inclusive, CalOSBA is committed to create an inclusive entrepreneurial and small business ecosystem, which is really a job that I take very seriously to eliminate opportunity gaps across zip code, race, and gender. So we are located across different regions. As I mentioned, I am in the Central California, representing 8 counties in the San Joaquin Valley, 4 in Central Coast, as well as some counties in the mountain regions, and then have counterpartners in Southern California and Northern California, just to give you a little bit of a larger scope of our work. I would like to begin by offering a brief overview of the California small business landscape. California is home to 4.1 million small businesses, representing 99.8% of all businesses in the state and employing 7.2 million workers in California. Just let those numbers sink for a little bit. Approximately 50% of the state's total workforce. Again, 50% of the state's total workforce. California small businesses are drivers of economic growth and mobility, creating 2/3 of net new jobs and employing nearly half of all private sector employees in the state. Small businesses are the economic engine, building California's economy, which is why we launched the California Small Business COVID-19 Relief Grant Program at the end of last year, which I believe some of you already heard and are well equipped and knowledgeable about this program. But just to give you a little bit more background, this financial support is so critical as our small businesses have been impacted by the COVID-19, the health and safety restrictions. On February 23rd, 2021, Governor Newsom signed legislation to provide an additional $2.75 billion for competitive grants for eligible small businesses, a 4-fold increase in the original $500 million grant program. Again, an increase of the $500 million grant program already that were allocated. This new allocation includes a special program allowance of $50 million for nonprofit and cultural institutions. We have worked diligently to roll this program out as soon as possible to get micro grants up to $25,000 in the hands of small businesses. We are partnering with our intermediary industry, a CDFI mission lender, as well as our technical assistant providers and capital providers, many which are in the panel today. So thank you for all the work that you all are doing. And to that note, there's many more capital and technical assistant and also resources that are made available to small businesses and micro and of diverse backgrounds throughout the state, which many of our speakers today will allude to and will share more of their resources. To that note, let's get started with the first question, which I have the honor of welcoming our wonderful panelists and sharing this very dynamic conversation with you all. These are trailblazers and community advocates that are working around the clock to better support and provide much needed resources and capital to micro and small businesses owned by women and people of color in California. So let's start with our first opening question. To get us started, would each of you please share more about your personal and professional backgrounds and how your trajectory has led you to the work you are currently doing to support micro and small businesses owned by women of people of color? To get us started, I would like to first ask the question to Yeri Olivares.
Thank you, Leticia. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here today. As Leticia mentioned, my name is Yeri Olivares. I was born in Colima, Mexico, raised here in Kerman, California, which is about a community 15 miles away west of the city of Fresno. And I did grow up with Spanish as my first language. I attended Fresno State here locally, so go Bulldogs. And I received my accounting degree here. even though I was not the first one attending college, I was the first generation to graduate from a four-year university in my family. So I get to share that with the rest of my family. I did grow up with cultural and gender responsibilities. And what that means is that being the youngest and being the only woman, because I have two older brothers, it seems like I tend to be the everything for my family. I tend to be the go-to person. So I get to be that person that cares for my parents. I help them with everything. And to the day, I help them with translating because, you know, they speak Spanish. And so I now serve, as Leticia mentioned, as the Chief Operating Officer for the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation and CEO for our new CDFI program, for which we are very excited about. This was my first job after college, and I am celebrating this year my 10-year anniversary here at the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation. I started coordinating workshops, providing the technical assistance, and then I became the organization's accountant, running all of the financial information here. I continued with packaging loans. And now I was just recently on a 5-year journey to founding and establishing our very own CDFI that has been founded by two Latinas here in the Central Valley. And our focus of the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation for the past 17 years has been helping underserved individuals and entrepreneurs who are primarily Hispanic, as well as women, and low income and rural communities. We have a business incubator here in Fresno from which we operate all of our programs and services. And we focus on providing financial literacy, education to individuals. We provide what we call technical assistance, which means that we help individuals that are looking to start or expand a business. And of course, our small business loan program, for which we provide microloans to small businesses here in the area. And today, I'm excited to share with all of you how we continue to serve our target market and all of the different innovative approaches that we are taking to make sure that we're really helping those small businesses that need the help, and that, you know, are primarily within the rural communities that don't have access to these type of resources. So thank you so much for the opportunity to allow me to share with all of you today on this platform. And I look forward to our continued conversation.
Thank you so much, Yeti, for sharing that. And once again, congratulations for now being a CDFI. And it's the only one across the San Joaquin Valley. So once again, owned by Latinas. So thank you so much for that. That's amazing. To the next question I pose to our second panelist will be Patty Chang. If you could also address the same question, we would really greatly appreciate it.
Sure. I was born in Hawaii to a Chinese clan. I had a grandmother who had bound feet. I had another who was a picture bride. And my kind of trajectory was not as direct as Yeti's. It was a slightly longer and winding road. But after law school, much to my parents' chagrin, who had worked really hard and wanted me to be some successful lawyer in some corporation, I decided to take a fellowship that really was catered more to women, to people of color in the country at that time. And it was to put us in places geographically that had less representation for poor individuals. So I worked for the Fresno Merced County's legal services for a couple of years. I eventually wound my way to the Women's Foundation, probably because I did one too many sexual harassment lawsuits and decided, you know, the legal system isn't about healing. And I wanted to get further upstream to do the work to stop the abuses from happening in the first place. So I was at the Women's Foundation for about 13 years, where we made about 1,000 grants to organizations serving low-income women and girls. So I adopted a child, and at a fairly early age for retirement in my 40s, decided that I would resign from the Women's Foundation. And I was invited to go to an Asian Pacific Microcredit Summit, where It was a wonderful experience. Everyone was completely welcoming. And it took me 3 days to see a woman on a panel, to be leading a panel, even though in the international microcredit field, everyone says that over 90% of their clients are women. So it was one of those where's Waldo moments. What is wrong with this picture? And decided that I needed to look into this a little bit more closely. At the same time, I happened to be in Kenya, and I was actually visiting the Kibera slums, which is one of the largest slums in the world, actually. And this was in the 90s. So it was a time when many of the people were suffering from AIDS, particularly women and children, but the retrovirals were going in. So the women were actually surviving this terrible disease. And what everyone was telling me is you need to find a way for these folks to earn a living. And I knew that I couldn't come back and do it necessarily through grants, that wasn't going to be sustaining. And so I really began to delve and to look more closely at what microcredit could do. Began Feed the Hunger Fund, and we did microloans, true microloans, the $100 to the woman, in Nepal to buy the cow. And we were involved in doing this on an international level for a couple of years until I was stopped by an elder in Hawaii. And for those of you who know the Hawaii culture, you have to pay attention when an elder tells you, Patty, you need to bring your model home. And I had to examine what that really meant. We decided to focus on food because we wanted to make an impact in a system. And food to me was more about nutrition. Feed the Hunger is not about feeding the hungry. It is about feeding the hunger in all of us to make a difference in the world. So food was a focal point for, yes, nutrition, but also community and culture. And it's also the place from a political angle where climate change, ownership of land, ownership of water, the environment, labor practices, immigration policies all come together and collide. And so that's where I wanted to be. And to try to help to provide opportunities for those that are left out of the mainstream finance world, and particularly to focus on these two areas. Agriculture and restaurants are not favorites of our larger financial institutions because they bear more risk. So what I believe that COVID has done is to kick the can down the road and to bring to the fore what all of us knew, but wasn't as articulated, in that food is not just political, it is essential.
Thank you, Patty, so much. And we'll definitely allude to specific industries most impacted during COVID in our next questions that are leading up to this. And thank you again for all the work that you have done in sharing how your trajectory has led you to where you're at today. I think it's very important. Why we're asking these questions is that we understand a lot of the participants here are students. So we always like to share our story. It's interesting how we got here, and we hardly have the space to share it with you and hopefully inspire the younger folks to also see these as opportunities in career. So that's why we're also posing our personal stories and weaving it into what led us to our professional careers. And to that next, I have the pleasure of bringing to the stage to Mora Peña. If you could also allude to the same question and weaving in your personal into what led you to professional career now.
Thank you, Leticia. And thank you again to UC Berkeley for hosting this amazing discussion. It's really one that is important. I caught most of the first panel and I thought that it was very amazing. As mentioned, I'm Xiomara Peña. I'm the Vice President of Engagement for Small Business Majority, and we're a national small business advocacy organization. For the last 15 years, we have dedicated ourselves to addressing the unique needs of small business owners, their employees, and self-employed entrepreneurs, particularly in underserved communities, so that they can continue to build a thriving and equitable economy. We engage our network of more than 85,000 small businesses and 1,000 business and community organizations to advocate for pragmatic public policy solutions and deliver resources to entrepreneurs. In my current role, I manage, as mentioned earlier, I manage our external engagement efforts that work towards addressing a more inclusive and equitable economy. I work with partners, I work with business owners, I work with a very broad range of stakeholders. And I should note that I've had many roles that have enabled me to really understand macro and micro solutions to support our diverse small business owners while at Small Business Majority over the last 7 years that I've been here. Leticia, I loved the framing of the question, inspiring us to share how our personal stories shaped our trajectories. And I'm delighted to share with such a broad range of listeners. You mentioned students that are tuning in and others, practitioners as well, some of those personal experiences that have led me to also doing the work that I'm doing today. Experiences like growing up in a low-income household with immigrant parents who leverage entrepreneurship to make a living, like many immigrants do, not just here in California, but across the country. Experiences like becoming a single teen parent, being a first-generation college student myself, and having myself leverage entrepreneurship to really make it by in those early years when I just had to. Yeah, I had a tutoring hustle in college and eventually did consulting work, but that's some of the ways that folks make it by. And so when we think about entrepreneurship, it really, it's not just talking about those businesses with 500 plus employees. I mean, the definitions are all over the place, but we focus on self-employed individuals, micro businesses with less than 10 employees, and those with less than 100 employees. And so as you can imagine, I take from these experiences and lean on them in my everyday work. And while some may describe them as barriers, to me, they created opportunity and promise. These helped me understand very early on the power of community-based organizations. Particularly when I became pregnant at a very early age, I was able to receive critical case management services from a local nonprofit called Unido Family Centers based in Los Angeles. They were critical to providing me with post-secondary education, scholarships, and encouraging me to pursue my education. I went on to work for them when I graduated from Cal State Northridge because I thought it was important for me to give back to some entity that had given me really so much. And so upon graduating, I went on to work with them. I worked specifically in Compton, Inglewood, and South LA. And South LA was important to me because it brought me back to a community where my parents actually raised us during our early years before we moved out to the San Fernando Valley. It was here when I truly learned about the systemic barriers that exist for Latino and Black communities, what I experienced during those years, and what I saw when I worked in those communities was broken infrastructure, a lack of opportunities, chronic job loss, income instability, over-policing, and a continuous cycle of poverty. It was also apparent to me because I had at this point just participated in a few internships with the city of LA and with the mayor's office. And so I really began understanding the role of politics in everyday life when I began understanding and spending a lot of time trying to understand the social determinants of health. And this further helped me to understand how economic and social conditions influence individual and group differences. So when the opportunity to join Small Business Majority arose, I was overjoyed because it was a blend of two things that I love, business and politics. The reality is our women and communities of color are huge contributors to our economy, and we want to be certain that they have the tools and the resources and the capital they need to be able to thrive. I saw the struggle of my own parents navigating the world of business ownership with language barriers and unfamiliarity with our systems, which were frankly designed to work well, just not well enough to meet the needs of everyone. And during this pandemic, our organization has done over 400 events, connected business owners to the federal relief programs that have been placed. We've advocated with policymakers at the national and state level for resources. We've worked on the grant program, getting information about PPP and other resources available. But nearly a year into the pandemic, business owners continue to face significant setbacks, in particular, business owners owned by people of color, which relied on some of the programs that relied on our existing financial systems that traditionally excluded a disproportionate number of people of color and women who are underbanked. I'm really excited to be sharing some of our polling in the upcoming questions. And I just want to end with recognizing something that I think Patty and others have alluded to. The pandemic did help clear away the fog and laid bare the systemic barriers that have existed for a long time that created the gaps in economic justice and health justice and social justice, a trifecta that we have a unique opportunity to address, especially as we consider building back a better economy that's centered on equity. So I'm really excited to continue the conversation. Leticia, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Xiomara. That is excellent. Thank you so much for weaving your personal story on how that also, your passion drove you to what the work that you're all doing now. And I think most of us got here because of our personal experiences of growing up, daughters of immigrants or immigrants ourselves as well too, and having to navigate these systems. So we'll definitely allude to that. And to our last panelist for the opening question, Robert Lattimore, if you could also allude to the same question that I have asked the panelists as our opening. And then we'll go into about 3 questions remaining for the panelists for discussion, and then we'll go into Q&A with the audience. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Lattimore, of course, and I'm an executive vice president with Main Street Launch. We're based in Oakland, California, and we are a 40-year-old CDFI. We just had our recent birthday, if you will, and I lead our African American Entrepreneur Institute as of 2015. In terms of personal career, part of having a long career, you need to be able to truncate it in short windows of time. So with that in mind, I should simply say that my trajectory and entry into the space was through the private sector. You know, started out being raised in Philadelphia, worked for a Fortune 7 publicly traded technology company. There, I realized that there were opportunities that existed for professional development and growth. My lens was always through budgets and then a P&L and finally a balance sheet and on to ownership. So it was a fairly narrow view. One day in my shop on my watch, our vice president of the foundation called and asked if there was anyone on my team that could be provided as an executive on loan to a community in the south side of Chicago. And so this was totally outside of the purview of a profit-driven corporation. And being a young manager, I said, of course, recommended a young person on my team. She went away for a year, changed the community. So that was sort of a pivot point for me and my ability to be able to really understand the impact that the private sector can have when it has a strategy that is about providing direction and guidance and value to a community. After several assignments, found myself in the Valley, that's Silicon Valley, running a division of a business, but beginning to focus now on smaller businesses, which is where we are today. Went from a very large 100,000 person firm to a very small business that helped technology companies. And I got a flavor for how capital is shaped. What are the types of resources that are required to be able to support new enterprises? Following that, I decided to start a business. I was frankly goaded into being an entrepreneur by a young lady on my team in a technology incubator who fundamentally said, you have no skin in the game, you're a W-2. And so part of that work resulted in an 8-year journey for a semiconductor clean room business, founded by myself and a couple of great people that was ultimately acquired. But again, the pivot point was at 120 employees, no one owned a home. I knew the wages were appropriate. I knew this team was talented. And so I managed to speak with my business broker, banker, who would provide financial literacy, who provided savings accounts, checking accounts. 8 years later, I exited. 35 of the employees applied for mortgages, 28 owned a home. So again, the IBM experience, the experience being goaded by a very sharp woman CEO at a technology company, pointing me to entrepreneurship, realizing that there's value when you decide to point the tip of the arrow of your business to the betterment of the community at large, with my small business. I then found myself working with a New American Community Corp as Chief Operating Officer. Met a very wonderful woman, Sylvia Rosales, who headed this organization. She charged me with creating a CDFI for it. But the power of this organization was that it gave me exposure to helping female entrepreneurs from 51 different countries on the planet. And in doing that work, I developed a great appreciation for the tenacity, strength, value, and the commitment that entrepreneurs, particularly women entrepreneurs, have around the United States and around the world. In closing, after being at the New America for various years, I intersected at Main Street Launch, where in 2015, I became the driver for the African American Entrepreneurship Institute. And I've been committed to that work since 2008. So a little bit about that, but of particular note, I always take a moment to thank my mother, who was a pharmacist who worked side by side with my dad for 30 years, put him through pharmacy school. And so that was the framework for my entrepreneurship. So a little bit about me, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation this afternoon.
Yes, thank you very much, Robert, for that. And yes, definitely always acknowledging the power of our mothers. So thank you for that acknowledgement. And so with that said, we'll get into the discussion questions. And once again, this is a very tough job. I'm among some trailblazer and brilliant people in the industry. I'm having to, keep time and keep us on track here. So I'm going to try my best, but here we go. Once again, it's such a privilege to be able to moderate this panel, and we'll go into the next discussion question here, which I think it touches to all the work that you all are doing and also the passion, and also alludes to still the challenges that the small businesses are facing currently at the moment. And so with that said, the next question is, what are some of the most pressing challenges diverse micro and small businesses, small farmers, because I know, Patti, that's one of a big demographic you work with, food vendors and entrepreneurs are facing to remain in business and generate revenue? And also, second part to that question is, what can investors, CDFIs, technical assistance providers, foundation, government, advocacy organizations, and any other small business serving institutions do to help mitigate these challenges and risk? And we'll go ahead and get started with Patti Chang, if you want to get us started with that question.
Sure. Thank you, Leticia. The challenges are multiple. I think particularly during this time of COVID, the lack of access to capital has always existed. That existed pre-COVID, it exists during COVID. I mean, when we're looking at 83% of small businesses in this country get started with not a loan from a bank, but loans from family and friends, credit cards, and some savings. We know that people and people of color have even less access to some of these structures. And it explains why, small businesses that men start out with capital of 80,000. Women-owned businesses start out with capital of 54,000. Many people who don't have other resources to go to, that cannot get loans from banks, are not going to grow. They're not going to have the same kind of credit opportunities, et cetera. And that stymies most small businesses for a very long period of time. For our small farmers, they had to, I hate that COVID pivot term, but it's very true. They had to figure out, what is this new world looking like? Where are my markets? Some markets closed down, obviously. Some markets that were around for decades were now turned into parking lots for cars. They had to figure out, my gosh, I thought I was doing well. I was growing microgreens for hotels. Well, the hotels are closed now. So what kind of fruits and vegetables, et cetera, do you have to turn to for the more local food economy? There are just so many ways that our borrowers have had to figure out new ways, new systems of doing things. For us, we were able to defer payments. We were able to actually integrate a new form of technical assistance work. So it's a blended coaching between our loan officers and 300 modules that we can direct our borrowers to go to and then come back to us to have more knowledge around cash flow, et cetera, marketing, whatever else they needed. So we've changed as a CDFI to be able to acknowledge where people are and to get over, to surmount some of the challenges and the barriers. I mean, when you're asking me about what all these other entities can do, partner together, really, to remove some of the barriers that get in the way. During COVID, we established a street food vendor program because I realized that we were having a hard time getting a PPP. I have 4 bankers on my board. I consider myself fairly well educated, and it was still a struggle to go through all of this. And I realized that there are those of us on the street pushing the carts that A New America Foundation really, in the old days, Robert, was very much in the forefront of, and that they had no opportunities. And so we established a grant program, and Wells Fargo has now stepped in to provide us with a very unique opportunity of having a 30% grant to a 70% loan for street food vendors. And I think it's these different ways of being, different ways of really addressing, standing in someone's shoes who is in need of some assistance, and figuring out what's the best way of doing it, and doing it in a different way. So something is not all grant, something is not all loan. How do we come together, do hybrids of different forms of assistance? So I'm sorry, I talked for too long. I will stop there.
No, definitely. I mean, you alluded to some very important strategies and best practices. One, partnering across sectors, across fields, and across the state. Private-public partnerships are critical and key. More than anything, being innovative yourselves and pivoting, not just small businesses that you're supporting, but yourselves as an organization is important. As they're pivoting, you are also being more innovative as well in your approaches. So thank you for all that. And Yeti, this brings you into the conversation. I know that y'all have had various strategies and innovation and practices in your new approaches on reaching especially micro and small businesses in very remote rural areas, specifically in San Joaquin Valley, that disproportionately were already having, there was huge gaps when it came to access. Could you allude a little bit into what are some of the approaches and innovative practices that you implemented, and to make sure that we're more inclusive in our reach?
Yes, thank you, Leticia. One of the unique characteristics of our CDFI is that we are providing a full scope of services. And what that means is that we are not only assisting the business owners with applying step by step and what we call the loan packaging, meaning helping them gather documentation needed for when they're going to apply for a loan, but we are also providing what we call the pre and post technical assistance. So we're helping them develop their business plans. We're helping them further develop their ideas. We're helping them formalize their business, because we know that a lot of the businesses, particularly those in the rural communities, they don't have a business license. And we found out that a lot of those individuals were not able to access relief grant programs because they didn't have the formalities necessary for them to be able to access some of these funds. And we come in with the funding, we do the lending, and then we help them after they get the loan as well. So we are there for the life of the business. We're not just here to give them the loan and we'll see you later type of thing. We're here to help them and provide this full scope of services. And so we know that we need to develop innovative products so that we can target those that we really want to help. And so we have developed a product for women entrepreneurs. We do have an 8-course virtual session that we started last year called Latinapreneur and Womanpreneur program, which is to help women entrepreneurs develop their strategic marketing plan. And what we initially thought before COVID was going to be a group of 40 women here in our training center participating on a weekly course turned into over 200 women participating. And we're talking about women across the world. This really opened up our perspective in how we can serve those that are very much needed. The course was provided in Spanish, and we had women joining us not only from the rural communities and other areas of the state in California, but also from women from Mexico, women from Peru, from Guatemala. And that really made us realize that we can grow as we go and continue to make an impact at the global level. One of the innovative solutions that we came up with when we participated in partnership with Cal OSBA and Industry with the California Relief Grant Program is that we knew the week before, as we were getting ready for the grant application to open, we went through step by step with their team, and I said, okay, what do we know that our small businesses are going to need? And we knew that they were not going to have access to technology, so they were not going to know how to fill out an application online. We knew that language was going to be a barrier. We knew that technology was going to be a barrier. So we decided to provide curbside scanning services. And we addressed the different barriers that we identified because we know what their needs are. Not only do we at the organization look like the community that we serve, but we also connect with them, we speak their language, and we know, what their challenges are. And so we are, regardless of geographic location, we are identifying ways that we can communicate with them, go to them if it comes down to them, go door to door, help them fill out these applications that otherwise they would not have access to. And so, as Patty mentioned, access to capital has been an issue before COVID. And so it's a matter of how can we continue to bring these services, particularly to those that are hard to reach, that we call hard to reach. Well, it's because they're not coming to us. We need to go to them. And so as we continue to develop our strategic planning, how can we reach those businesses, is we're going to them so that we can bring them the resources that are very much needed.
Thank you so much. And those innovative approaches really made a difference in whether people were able to upload documents or not, because we knew that we have huge technological gaps specifically in our rural communities. And so thank you all for stepping it up and really demonstrating and sharing those best practices with partners across the state. And I think those are the type of partnerships that we're looking forward to really ensure that no one's left out of these important, new, innovative, blended capital programs and approaches to these issues. So thank you so much, Yeti, for that. And our next question here, I want to bring in Mora into this conversation because you all also are advocates. You really leverage the voices and make sure that when there's gaps, you all go and ask the small businesses. I know that you all have been running a couple of surveys lately as well to kind of better understand what are some of these gaps and the importance of centering women and people of color owned businesses. What can you share from those surveys? What have they demonstrated to us as well too, and how has it complemented the work of your partners on the ground?
Well, when we think about, thank you, Leticia, when we think about the voice of small business, it is very powerful. Just last year, even before last year, but studies have shown that business owners are very much valued as trusted messengers because they are in our communities, right? They are, you mentioned, they employ half of the private sector workforce here in California. They create 2 out of every 3 new jobs here in California. They are the makeup of our local economy. And so because they are so rooted in community, they are highly respected by community. And I think that they moved into the #1 trusted slot, even more trusted than government, even more trusted than other agencies, right up there with veterans. And I think it's mothers and women. And so, small business owners have a very, very strong voice, but very rarely do they have a seat at the table when policy is being discussed and crafted for them. And this is important because oftentimes you conflate what is a big issue, big business problem with what is a small business problem, and you try to create solutions that are one size fits all, which I think can be very easy. However, they miss the boat when you talk about the opportunity to really meet people where they're at, as Yeti mentioned. You want to be able, so what we do polling, where we will, hire pollsters or work alongside with a pollster to not do a poll of our own network, but rather of business owners across the country or across the state. We've been doing monthly surveys of our network. It's 85,000 folks that are in our newsletters, receive our emails, and come to events and things like that. So we also will engage that network of 85,000 small businesses to put out monthly surveys. And as a result of those surveys, they've really helped inform the policy solutions that we've made in real time with policymakers around the federal relief programs that we needed. Look, we've been calling for a grant program at the national level since the beginning of the pandemic. And just recently, it sounds like this administration is going to be looking at possibly implementing something nationally. And so the fact that states like California and others have implemented successful grant programs, Pennsylvania did theirs, Colorado, South Carolina, it really points to the fact that there is an immediate need. We also, in addition to the surveys and the polling, we also do work directly with business owners and connect them to media opportunities. And so we help them get placements for op-eds, opinion letters, editorials. We also help them get placements for letters to the editor, help them get connected to their elected officials. This is really important because oftentimes as practitioners, we ourselves are provided one platform, but the personal stories have to still be connected in order for us to effectuate change. And so I always tell folks, like, you have a voice, tap into it, and become your own advocate. It's very, very powerful. With regards to, I'll just close very briefly. You mentioned the surveying, and I just want to mention a couple of interesting and stark findings that we found. I mean, without any additional relief, and thankfully a lot of parts have reopened recently, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. So the last question around farmers and micro businesses, there's still a lot of uncertainty that makes it very, very challenging for folks to plan. But capital is a clear need. And I'll just say, our findings have found nearly 1 in 4 entrepreneurs of color may lay off employees permanently in the next few months. Without additional relief, about 30% of small businesses in our network, including 36% of Black and Latino owned businesses, fear that they will be forced to close their door for good in the next 3 months. These are the kinds of findings that I think have been extremely helpful for us when we've been talking about how we can build solutions to address the need.
Thank you so much, Mora, and that's so important. And for folks that are not familiar with Small Business Majority's work, Xiomara, if you don't mind sharing the link to your website, that would be great, because I think the polls and surveys that you all are doing are critical. We use it a lot for our policy work for sure. So I know that it does create impact and change for small businesses. And thank you all for bringing them in and making sure they have a seat at the table. Robert, let's bring you back into this conversation. I know you all are in a very unique position because you are also in very inner city areas in the Bay, but also more in semi-urban rural Stockton. And so and other areas in the region as well too, San Joaquin. What were some of the changes that you all had to do in pivoting and really making sure that you were meeting the small businesses where they're at? Were you all also implementing more blended capital approaches such as grants? If you could just share a little bit more about what you all saw and how you were able to quickly also pivot to support those needs of small businesses.
Sure, glad to. I should say that in order to be able to service both San Francisco, Oakland, Stockton, 3 different types of communities, for us, for perhaps the very first time in many years, we solicited the help of the mayors of those cities. They were incredibly active, engaged, poised, and ready to support. And so that sort of talks to the blending of capital issue. There were many small businesses. It's estimated that 41% of Black businesses in this nation will never come back. Currently, there's a lot of work around understanding how true that is, but nevertheless, fairly devastating work for the African-American community. In doing that, we look back since March of 2020 across those three communities and others, Riverside County, City of Mountain View. We have deployed over $88 million of capital. And that is at a scale that we have never done in the history of this organization. And of course, it's not reflective of the need. So in having the support of incredible foundation work, coupled with our CDFI operational experience and the leadership of strong mayors in those particular localities, I think we were able to provide what we call emergency assistance. And so currently the landscape is one that is looking at something that's called recovery and imagining what getting back to regular business is going to be like. And quite frankly, my view is we're not going to get back to regular business. The nature of regular business is for it to change and innovate. The only difference being that as we begin to change and innovate technical services approaches, capital deployment approaches, ecosystem implementation, that there is equity across all LMI communities when this strategy is brought to bear. And so some of the very practical challenges that exist for entrepreneurs, whether they're Asian, Latino, African-American, have very much to do with the practical operations of the support for their families. Quite frankly, cash flow. I mean, there is less than 3 days of cash available in micro enterprises and small businesses to be able to continue operations. So that is a huge problem. The emergency funding, I believe, has helped in that regard. Second, a workforce. Many of the communities that I'm speaking about have had disproportionate impacts of COVID from a medical perspective in their communities and families. And so you will find many families in this nation who are multi-generational families living in a household who are part of these micro enterprises. So many of them are part of the core workforce. That workforce is a challenge for many types of businesses going forward. And then last, perhaps very practically, is that cost of doing business has changed. I was speaking with a daycare center. They paid $12 for a package of gloves for PPE. In the heat of battle, that went to $29 a package. So that eviscerates the margins, it reduces wages, it destabilizes businesses. And in this particular instance, it's for America's most valuable asset, our children. And so across the board, we've seen capital deployment, specialized TA, and we've received the support of the foundations in a very aggressive way with city mayors to bring some level of comfort to a very uncomfortable situation that exists.
Thank you, Robert, very much for all those important points. And definitely the point where you address not sufficient cash flow beyond a certain period of time. I mean, that was before COVID, right? And now it's exacerbated even more. So I think it's very important as we look for what is a recovery and not going back to what we had, but doing better an inclusive economic model, which will be one of the closing questions, but it's very critical and important. And to that, I know there was some dark moments in time, but there was also some moments where there were a lot of businesses that were opening as well too, led by people of color and women as well in the San Joaquin Valley, LA, or Bay Area and San Diego, or the border region. Here, I'm gonna be opening it up to you all on what successful stories, or what I should say, stories that uplifted you. of some of the small businesses that inspired you, that reminded you of your own drive and why you do this work every day. And let me see if who wants to go first. Pati, Yeris, Mora, Robert. Any successful stories y'all like want to share with the audience that we're like, in Spanish we say, si se puede, it can be done. And these are just the resilient, everyday champions in our communities.
Well, perhaps I can give a short story. It's a story about a fairly phenomenal African-American woman who found herself, quite frankly, it's called McMullen, right? So for those of you who are online, go to shopmcmullen.com. And Sherry McMullen found herself in a job that she really just hated. It was an accounting job. However, she became a buyer for Neiman Marcus. And out of that work, she began to develop a line of stores that were retail, that were fashion driven. She has 3 locations now. The Wells Fargo Foundation has been gracious enough to visit her store, and we had a major kickoff in Oakland, California, with Sherry's store. She is empowering other women by providing internships. She's empowering other businesses in the ecosystem by ensuring that products and services that her business needs, she contracts with those businesses. She's grown her business from a $50,000 sales business to a little over $1 million now. So it's a very large business, and she has national notoriety. She's been found in Forbes. She's been invited for Fashion Week in New York, and she is so grounded. She will always say that she is a young Black woman from a farm in Oklahoma who knows how to farm and knows the power of it. And so Sherry McMullen is really just short of fantastic in my view.
Thank you so much. And Mora, you had one story as well you wanted to show before we go into our closing?
Yeah, I just wanted to share, and I'm sure Yeti, you had this experience since you guys were doing drive-through scanning services with our community for the grant program, but I'll talk briefly about that. I was able to help safely, COVID safe, of course. We were able to help some business owners in the East LA region, Spanish speakers with access to tech, complete their grant programs, and their grant program application. I have to tell you, the sense of just sheer gratitude that they shared in being able to have someone that wasn't going to charge them for the service, being able to have some support with the process and explaining and answering the questions about this process. I think I didn't leave any of those businesses without something, even though I very adamantly let them know I was very full. The tacos and quesadilla did keep coming. I thought the gentleman that owned a barbershop was going to ask me to sit down in the chair, but thankfully he didn't, because that would have been you would have seen a different Xiomara today. But it's really just a testament of, and I just want to share those collective small business owners, because it's really just a testament of when you're able to really do the technical assistance piece right, you're really able to meet the need that exists in our community in terms of supporting business owners. And another business owner that came to mind when you asked the question was Teresa Razo. She is the business owner of 2 restaurants in the Orange County region, and Latina business owner. She had to shut down her restaurants. She had one where she had converted it to, marketplace for some time in order for her to stay afloat. But I remember her breaking down at the very beginning of the pandemic and just saying, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to stay afloat. I don't know how, it's hard for me to let my employees go. I'm responsible for them as well, as many of the business owners we work with have that sense. The federal relief isn't coming through yet. I'm not sure what steps I need to do. Today she's still operating both of her restaurants. She was able to get federal relief. and as well as obtain additional relief to help her businesses stay afloat with her husband. So we've heard the stories of resiliency and the pivoting have been there. I mean, it would not be fair to not mention that there haven't been stories of bankruptcy and closure, but knowing that there are some that have been able to acquire the resources that they need in order to continue, I think that was one of the great stories that I can think of.
Yes, thank you so much. I wish we could continue. Unfortunately, we're short on time here, but I wanted to, again, just a gratitude and applaud to all our speakers and to you all that are doing the work on the ground. Muchas gracias. Thank you. We look forward to working together diligently to ensure that in the recovery, it looks better, it's more inclusive, and it's stronger than ever as we move into this year. So thank you all once again for all the amazing work, and our panelists, once again, in deep gratitude. Thank you all for sharing your great work, and looking forward to continue to working together to make sure that it's an inclusive process moving forward for small businesses. Thank you so much. And now I will hand over the mic to the co-director of the center, Eric.
Great, thanks so much. First, I just am going to say a couple very brief remarks. Eric Schickler, co-director of IGS, along with Cristina Mora. I first want to thank the Wells Fargo Foundation for their support that has made this really exciting new program possible, both this event and our internship program with students and their research projects that we're really looking forward to building upon the great insights from this summit today with our students as they engage in policy work over the summer. I'd also like to thank our panelists and the moderators for their terrific comments throughout, and the audience for your excellent questions. Finally, a big shout out to the staff who played an essential role in making this event possible at IGS, Kelly Jones and Christine Trost, our executive director, who did just amazing work, Hagit Caspi in the Letters and Sciences office, who also was a tremendous help. I also want to give a special shout out also to my co-director, Cristina Mora, whose vision in working with Wells Fargo really helped make this entire program possible. And so again, thanks everyone, and we look forward to future conversations.